Have you ever felt the sensation of hitting an invisible wall? I know that moment when your plans just stop working, as if the universe has decided to put a big NO in your path. Maybe it was that job that seemed perfect, but the vacancy went to someone else. Or that relationship that you were sure would work out, but ended abruptly. It's those moments when you look up at the sky and ask yourself, why? Why now? Why me? I know what it's like to wake up in the morning carrying that weight in your chest, that anxiety that arises when the plans you've drawn up so carefully start to fall apart. It's like having prepared a trip for months and when it's time to leave, discovering that all the flights have been canceled indefinitely. Frustration mixes with fear. Fear turns into doubt, and soon you begin to question whether you should have dreamed less or prepared more. This cycle of thoughts is as common as sunrise, even if many of us believe we're the only ones who feel it. I remember watching a child trying to push a heavy door. She pushed with all her might in the wrong direction, while the sign clearly said pull. Sometimes we're like that child, pushing with all our energy when we should be pulling, or insisting on one path when life is trying to show us another direction. It's not that we're doing anything wrong. We just haven't yet realized that there are different directions than the ones we imagined. How many times have you found yourself repeating the same patterns, trying the same solution to different problems, hitting the same key even when the music has changed? It's like that route you drive to work every day. Even when there's a traffic jam, you resist taking an alternative route because the known, even if problematic, seems safer than the unknown. We cling to the familiar even when it no longer serves us, because the new brings with it the weight of uncertainty. Obstacles have a curious way of appearing just when we are most confident in our path. It's like planning a picnic for weeks and at the appointed time, seeing the dark clouds forming on the horizon. We feel that twinge of injustice, as if the world had specifically chosen that moment to thwart us. We look at others and it seems that everything flows so naturally for them, while for us every step is a battle. But know that behind the scenes, everyone faces their own storms. I notice how people tend to hide their struggles. At social gatherings, on social media, even among close friends, we talk about successes but rarely share the setbacks, the closed doors, the dreams deferred. We've created a culture of apparent perfection where obstacles are seen as personal failings rather than natural parts of the journey. And so, when we encounter our own barriers, we feel that there is something wrong with us, when in fact we are just living the human experience to the full. There is a particular anxiety that arises when we encounter a roadblock, that feeling that time is passing and we are falling behind. We see others moving forward while we feel like we're stuck in quicksand. It's like standing in a queue that doesn't move, while the queues next to us seem to flow effortlessly. This perception of stagnation can be more painful than the obstacle itself, fueling a cycle of negative thoughts that only sink us further. What we don't realize is that sometimes appearing to stand still is a necessary part of moving forward. I've noticed how differently we react to obstacles depending on our energy at the time. On the same day, the same barrier can seem like a minor inconvenience or an insurmountable mountain. In the morning, with a rested mind, we find creative solutions. At the end of the day, exhausted, the same problem seems unsolvable. It's not the obstacle that has changed, but our ability to respond to it. And we rarely take this into account when judging our ability to overcome challenges. There's something interesting that happens when we accept that obstacles are part of the journey. It's like when you're driving and you come across a diversion. At first there's frustration, then acceptance, and eventually you discover a landscape, a shop, a path that you would never have known about if you had followed the original route. Some of life's greatest gifts come disguised as problems, setbacks, plans gone wrong. But in order to see this, we must first abandon our resistance to what is. Life's no's have a curious pattern that we can only realize by looking back. That job you didn't get years ago, can you now see what a bad fit it would have been for your true talents? That relationship that ended painfully, do you realize how you've made room to find someone who resonates more deeply with who you are? Closed doors are just as important as open ones in building the path that leads us to becoming who we really are. There is a wisdom in the body that we often ignore when we face obstacles. That feeling of tightness in the chest when we're going down the wrong path, or that inexplicable lightness when, despite the challenges, we know we're heading in the right direction. Your body whispers truths that your mind, busy with plans and expectations, often can't hear. Obstacles sometimes arise not to impede your progress, but to redirect you onto a path that is more in line with who you really are, beyond the layers of who you think you should be. Before we move on, I'd like you to know that this conversation isn't about denying the real pain that obstacles bring. I'm not suggesting that you force a smile when your heart is broken or ignore disappointment when your efforts seem in vain. The pain is real, the frustration is valid. What I am inviting you to consider is that maybe, just maybe, there is a bigger pattern unfolding, one that you will only be able to fully understand when you look back and connect the dots. Because often what seems like the end of a road is just the invitation to discover a new one. Have you ever noticed how water in a river always finds its way? It doesn't fight the stone in its path, it simply flows around it. The stone is not an end, but part of the journey. In the same way, the obstacles in our lives are not necessarily absolute barriers, but elements that mold our flow. Water never loses sight of its destination, the ocean, even when it has to go around entire mountains. Perhaps we can learn something profound from this dance between persistence and adaptability. Think of a seed planted in the ground. It begins its journey in complete darkness, pressed down on all sides by the heavy earth. If that seed could think like us, perhaps it would consider its situation hopeless, buried alive, with no light, no room to move. However, it is precisely this pressure, this seemingly cruel darkness, that creates the conditions for it to transform, break out of its shell and begin to grow. What seemed to be her tomb was actually her cradle. How often do we misinterpret our own darkness? I remember talking to a woman who lost her job of 15 years during a company restructuring. At the age of 52, she felt as if the world had ended. "Who's going to hire me now?" she asked through tears. 6 months later, this same woman told me how that redundancy forced her to finally start the small business she had always dreamed of. "If I hadn't been pushed out of the nest, I would never have discovered that I could fly," she said with a sparkle in her eyes that hadn't been there before. The closed door wasn't the end of the story, it was just the first chapter. In the tradition of many ancient cultures, darkness was never seen as the absence of light, but as a space of gestation, of preparation, of transformation. The alchemists talked about the nigredo, the phase of darkness and apparent decomposition that preceded any significant transformation. In ancient Egypt, the dark, fertile soil left by the floods of the Nile was called Kemet, the black earth that brought life. Perhaps our darkest moments, when obstacles seem insurmountable, are actually fertile ground where something new is about to germinate. Have you ever noticed how the stories that touch us the most, whether in books or films, always involve characters facing seemingly impossible obstacles? We're rarely interested in narratives where everything happens easily. It's the hero or heroine overcoming challenges that inspires us, that makes us cheer, that moves us. For some deep reason, we recognize in these stories the truth about our own journey. It's not the absence of obstacles that makes a life remarkable, but how we respond to them. Perhaps we are living a more extraordinary story than we realize. Consider how we interpret obstacles differently depending on our expectations. When we plan a difficult hike up a mountain, we are not surprised or discouraged when we encounter steep terrain or rocks along the way. We expect them, we even prepare for them. Difficulty is part of the experience we seek. But when we encounter obstacles on the way to our dreams, we often greet them with indignation, as if we were entitled to a perfectly paved road. What if challenges were a natural part of the journey, just as they are in the mountains? The seasons have a lot to teach us about the cycles of obstacles and progress in our lives. Winter isn't a mistake in the planet's programming, it's a necessary phase. During this seemingly dead time, the trees are directing energy to their roots, strengthening themselves from within. The earth is resting, accumulating nutrients. Everything seems still on the surface, but intense activity is taking place in the depths. Sometimes what seems like stagnation in our lives is just a necessary winter, preparing us for a spring we can't yet see. In Eastern martial arts, there is a principle called yield to win. Instead of pitting force against force, the practitioner learns to use the opponent's energy in their favor, redirecting it rather than resisting it. A Tai Chi master once told me, "The rigid tree breaks in the storm, while the flexible bamboo bends and then straightens." Perhaps the obstacles in our lives are not enemies to be defeated, but energies to be redirected. It's not about subduing them with brute force, but dancing with them with grace and intelligence. There's an old story about a farmer whose horse ran away. The neighbors came and said, "What terrible luck." The farmer only replied, "Perhaps." The next day, the horse returned with 7 wild horses. The neighbors exclaimed, "What incredible luck." The farmer said, "Maybe." Then his son tried to tame one of the wild horses and broke his leg. "What a tragedy," said the neighbors. "Maybe," replied the farmer. The next day, army officers came to the village calling all the young men to war, but the farmer's son was dismissed because of his broken leg. "What luck," said the neighbors. "Maybe," said the farmer. This story reminds us how rarely we can see the whole picture when we're in the middle of an apparent obstacle. Have you ever realized how it's often the most challenging moments that teach us the most about ourselves? It's when we lose our job that we discover resources we didn't know we had. It's when we face an illness that we learn to value aspects of life that we previously ignored. It's when a relationship ends that we begin to understand what we really need in a partner. It's not that these obstacles are good in themselves, it's that they have the power to reveal truths that ease keeps hidden. They force us to look deeper. Many spiritual traditions talk about how growth rarely happens in conditions of total comfort. As a Zen master once said, "No lotus flower grows on marble, it needs muddy waters to flourish." Or as Christians speak of the valley of the shadow that precedes the green pastures. It's not that these traditions glorify suffering, it's that they recognize that obstacles often create the necessary conditions for our awakening. It is the difficult moments that often shatter our illusions and open us up to deeper truths. Modern neuroscience has discovered something fascinating. Our brains form new neural connections more quickly when faced with obstacles than when everything flows easily. It's called challenge-induced neuroplasticity. In other words, we grow more when we encounter resistance. It's like physical training. Your muscles only get stronger when they meet the resistance of weights. Perhaps the obstacles in your life are not punishments or bad luck, but the very weights your spirit needs to develop its inner strength. Our natural tendency when we encounter an obstacle is to ask, "Why is this happening to me?" It's an understandable question, but rarely a productive one. Perhaps a more useful question would be, what is this inviting me to discover? It's not about denying the pain or difficulty, but about changing our relationship with it from passive victim to curious explorer. When we change the question, we begin to realize that the obstacle is not just something that happens to us, but something that can happen for us, opening doors to dimensions of ourselves that would otherwise remain dormant. There is a subtle but profound difference between resisting an obstacle and relating to it. Resistance says, "This shouldn't be happening." Relationship asks, "What's really going on here?" The first attitude closes us off to struggle. The second opens us up to discovery. When we abandon the narrative that obstacles are unfair interruptions in our path, we can begin to see them as an integral part of the journey. It's like the difference between fighting against the current or learning to sail through it. Both require effort, but one exhausts us while the other carries us forward. Have you ever noticed how it's often precisely the forced detours that lead us to extraordinary discoveries? Christopher Columbus set out to find a way to the Indies and stumbled across an entire continent. Alexander Fleming was looking for something completely different when an experiment ruined by a fungus led him to discover penicillin. Thomas Edison talked about how each failed attempt to create the light bulb wasn't a failure, but the discovery of yet another path that didn't work. History is full of people whose greatest advances came from apparent obstacles or mistakes. When an obstacle appears, our first instinct is to try to quickly return to their original plan. But sometimes the obstacle isn't a temporary diversion from the path, it's an invitation to a whole new path. Think of all the people who have lost jobs only to discover vocations more in line with their true gifts, or those who have faced health problems that have forced them to reevaluate priorities and find a more balanced way of life. The obstacle, seen in this way, is not something that stands in the way of our destiny, but something that directs us towards it when we are following the wrong route. There is an ancient practice of desert nomads that can teach us a lot. When a sandstorm suddenly arose, they didn't fight it or try to continue on their original path. Instead, they would set up their tents, turn inwards, and use this forced downtime to tell stories, repair equipment, and rest. When the storm passed, they moved on refreshed. The obstacles in our lives can be like these storms, invitations not to abandon the journey, but to pause, turn inwards, and perhaps make necessary repairs before moving on. Many of history's greatest changemakers talk about moments of breakthroughs that preceded their most significant discoveries. Gandhi experienced a humiliation in South Africa that crystallized his mission. Martin Luther King Jr. faced imprisonment that deepened his understanding of nonviolence. Nelson Mandela described how his 27 years in prison, instead of destroying him, transformed him into the man capable of leading reconciliation. It was not in spite of these obstacles that they carried out their transformative work, but largely because of them. The obstacles were not detours from the journey, they were the journey itself. One woman I knew lost everything in a fire, her house, her possessions, even irreplaceable photo albums. It was as if the universe had erased my story, she told me through tears. 3 years later, she had become a passionate advocate for homeless people, built a life with much less attachment to material things, and discovered an inner strength she never knew she possessed. That fire burnt everything except what was really important, she told me, and that it only purified. What seemed like destruction also turned out to be clarification. We often ask for our problems to be solved, when what we really need is for our horizons to be expanded. A problem seen from a limited perspective seems impossible. The same problem seen from a broader perspective often reveals unexpected solutions. It's like being lost in a forest. When we climb a hill and gain a wider view, we realize paths that simply weren't visible before. Many obstacles persist not because they are intrinsically unsolvable, but because we keep looking at them through the same limiting lens. There is a phenomenon called post-traumatic growth that psychologists have studied intensively in recent decades. Unlike the better-known post-traumatic stress disorder, post-traumatic growth describes how people often experience profoundly positive changes after facing great adversity. Greater appreciation for life, more meaningful relationships, increased personal strength, greater spiritual openness, and new possibilities. It's not that these people wish the trauma away or deny their suffering, it's that they have discovered, in the very ashes of their trials, seeds of renewal that they wouldn't have found otherwise. I remember a man with a congenital physical disability who became an extraordinary para-athlete. When I asked him if he could, he would remove his disability, his answer surprised me. I'm not sure. It was my greatest limitation that led me to develop my greatest strength. He wasn't romanticizing his condition or denying his real difficulties. He was simply recognizing how what seemed to be just a barrier also became a doorway to his unique gifts. The obstacle became an integral part of his identity and purpose, not something separate from who he was. Indigenous traditions around the world have a concept we call wound present. It's the realization that our deepest wounds, when embraced and integrated rather than denied, often become the source of our unique medicine for the world. The wounded shaman can heal others precisely because he knows the way through the pain. The leader who has faced exclusion can create genuine inclusion precisely because they know what it's like to be on the outside. The obstacle, when fully crossed and assimilated, does not diminish our light. It becomes part of the unique light we have to offer. There is a Japanese art called kintsugi that repairs broken ceramics by using gold to join the fragments together. Instead of hiding the cracks, they are highlighted, honored as part of the object's history. The result is a piece that is more beautiful and valuable than it was before it broke. Perhaps we could look at our own lives in this way, not expecting a journey without breaks, but learning the art of repairing our breaks with gold. The places where we have been challenged, where we have faced obstacles, where we have felt broken, these can become, paradoxically, the strongest and most beautiful points in our story. The metaphors we use to describe obstacles profoundly shape how we experience them. When we say hitting a wall, we feel something very different than when we say being at a turning point. When we talk about carrying a burden, we feel something different from being in a process of transformation. Language doesn't just describe reality, it helps create it. Perhaps one of the most powerful steps we can take when facing obstacles is to re-examine the metaphors we use to describe them. Not to deny their difficulty, but to make room for their transformative potential. Much of our anxiety in the face of obstacles comes not only from the obstacle itself, but from the fear of the unknown that it represents. We were following a familiar map, and suddenly that map no longer fits. The road we were hoping to take is closed. We don't know what's coming next. It's natural to feel afraid at that moment. But perhaps we can find some comfort in the realization that humanity's greatest advances, as well as its greatest personal transformations, have often started exactly like this, with a map that no longer fit and the need to explore unknown territory. The first step to turning obstacles into portals is simply to stop fighting them. This doesn't mean resignation or passivity. It means creating a space of acceptance of what is before trying to transform it. It's like the difference between swimming against the current, exhausting yourself, or first floating to regain strength and clarity before choosing a direction. When you encounter an obstacle that seems insurmountable, try just being with it for a few minutes. Observe it without judgment. Name what you are feeling. This simple act of conscious presence often reveals perspectives and possibilities that desperate struggle obscures. A man who lost his business of 30 years told me how, after months of anger and resistance, he finally sat down with a notebook and wrote, "What really happened? What have I really lost? What do I still have?" These simple questions helped him to separate the facts from the catastrophic story he was telling himself. Yes, he had lost the business, but he hadn't lost his skills, his relationships, or his ability to start something new. By separating what really happened from the layers of interpretation and catastrophizing, he began to find a way forward that had previously seemed completely blocked. There's a powerful exercise I learned from a spiritual master. He asked us to imagine a current obstacle as a parcel delivered to our door. "You didn't ask for it," he would say, "but it arrived anyway. Now, instead of leaving it at the entrance like something unwanted, bring it inside. Unwrap it with curiosity. Ask, what's in here for me?" This simple repositioning from something that happens against us to something that can contain an unexpected gift profoundly changes our relationship with obstacles. It's not a question of denying the difficulty, but of opening ourselves up to its possible meanings. When we face an obstacle that shakes our foundations, a simple but powerful practice is to ask the question, who am I when everything I thought defined me is removed? A man who lost his top corporate job after 30 years told me how this question led him to rediscover passions and talents he had left behind in his youth. "I identified so much with my title and my salary that I had forgotten that I am much more than that," he said. The obstacle of losing his job became a portal to a broader, more authentic identity that was waiting to be rediscovered. A practice of positive psychology called found benefits has proven remarkably effective for people dealing with adversity. It's not about denying pain or pretending that negative things are positive. Instead, it's the exercise of asking, although I would never have chosen this difficulty, what unexpected benefits came with it? A woman diagnosed with a chronic illness told me how this exercise helped her recognize how her condition forced her to simplify her life, prioritize meaningful relationships, and develop a deep gratitude for simple things that she previously took for granted. When I'm working with someone facing a seemingly insurmountable obstacle, I often ask them to imagine being 10 years in the future, looking back at this moment. From the perspective of this imagined future, I ask, how did this obstacle end up fitting into your bigger story? What did you end up learning or developing through it that proved valuable? This perspective memory exercise can open up space for possibilities that are hard to see when we're in the middle of difficulty. It's not about predicting the future, but remembering that there will be a future beyond the current obstacle. A simple but transformative technique that I've seen work time and time again is the practice of transforming "why me" into "what for." The first question traps us in victimization, while the second opens us up to purpose and meaning. A father whose daughter was born with special needs told me how this change of question completely transformed his experience. When I stopped asking why this had happened to us and started asking what it might be preparing us for, the whole energy shifted, he said. The challenge didn't diminish, but our relationship with it was transformed. When faced with an obstacle, we often focus only on the immediate problem in front of us. But there's an expanded awareness practice that can be tremendously useful. Imagine yourself taking a step backwards, then another and another, until you can see not just the obstacle but the larger context in which it exists. Up close, we only see the stone in the way, From afar, we can see the whole path with all its curves, landscapes, and alternative possibilities. This practice of mental zooming out helps us avoid the trap of mistaking a temporary obstacle for the end of the road. A practical way of turning obstacles into portals is through what I call unexpected alliances. When we face a challenge, our tendency is to seek help from obvious and familiar sources. But it is often unexpected connections that offer the greatest opportunities for transformation. An entrepreneur facing bankruptcy told me how, instead of hiding his situation, he began to share it openly and ended up finding an unlikely mentor in a competitor who had faced and overcome similar challenges. The obstacle became a gateway to an alliance that would never have been born in easy times. One practice I often recommend for people facing recurring obstacles is to create what I call a resilience log. It's a diary where you document obstacles you faced in the past, how you felt during them, and how you eventually got through them. At times when a new obstacle seems insurmountable, this log serves as a tangible reminder of your proven ability to overcome challenges. I've been in places that seemed hopeless before, you might say to yourself, and I found a way. I can do it again. To truly turn obstacles into portals, we need to be willing to question our most fundamental assumptions about what constitutes success and failure. An artist who faced rejection after rejection told me how he finally realized that he had defined success in an extremely limited way: external recognition and validation. When he expanded his definition to include personal growth, authenticity of expression, and connection with a smaller but more engaged audience, the same obstacles that seemed to block him turned into useful filters, directing him towards his true path. The most powerful transformation often comes not from trying to overcome an obstacle directly, but from changing our relationship with it. A woman who struggled with chronic anxiety told me how, after years of trying to get rid of it through countless techniques, she finally found freedom when she began to treat it not as an enemy to be defeated, but as a messenger to be listened to. My anxiety was trying to tell me something important about my life, she discovered, and when I stopped fighting it and started listening to it, it turned from an enemy into an ally. The obstacle, when approached with curiosity rather than resistance, turned out to be a portal to deeper self-knowledge. The journey of turning obstacles into portals is not a straight line. It's more like a spiral. We revisit familiar territory, but each time from a different level of understanding. Don't be surprised if you find yourself facing similar challenges to those you've overcome before. This doesn't mean that you've failed or that you're stuck in an endless cycle. It means that life is offering you an opportunity to integrate your lessons on a deeper level. As a Zen master once said, before enlightenment, chop wood and carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood and carry water. The difference is not in the external activity, but in the awareness we bring to it. There is wisdom in realizing that not all obstacles in our path are there to be overcome. Some are there to direct us to a different path. Sometimes persistence means continuing to knock on the same door until it opens. Other times, it means having the courage to realize that we're at the wrong door. True wisdom lies in discerning the difference. How do you tell the difference between an obstacle that is testing your resolve and one that is redirecting your path? There is no simple formula, but often the answer comes not just from your analytical mind, but from the integrated wisdom of your body, heart, and intuition. When we observe nature, we see that the most resilient systems are not the most rigid or immutable, but the most adaptable. The oak tree that inflexibly resists the wind can break in a storm, while the bamboo that bends survives. Similarly, our resilience in the face of life's obstacles comes not from an inflexible determination to follow only one path, but from our ability to adapt, to find new routes, to evolve in response to the challenges we encounter. Rigidity breaks us. Flexibility allows us to continue our journey, even if it takes unexpected paths. We often ask, how can I overcome this obstacle? But perhaps the most powerful question is, how is this obstacle already changing me? The first question keeps the obstacle as something separate from us, something to be conquered. The second recognizes that the very process of encountering and responding to the obstacle is already changing us, shaping us, preparing us. Like iron that strengthens in fire or muscle that grows under tension, we don't emerge from our encounters with significant obstacles as the same people we were before, whether we succeed in overcoming them or not. One of the biggest pitfalls we encounter when dealing with obstacles is the tendency to compare our journey with that of others. We look at people who seem to move forward effortlessly, free of the roadblocks we face, and feel that there's something wrong with us. But this comparison is almost always based on an illusion. As a wise old man once told me, never compare your hoop with someone else's finished tapestry. Everyone faces obstacles. The difference lies only in which obstacles we face when we face them and how visible they are to others. Your journey is unique, as are the specific portals your obstacles open. There is a promise embedded in every significant obstacle we face, the promise to become more than we were before. Not because the obstacle itself has any magical power, but because the process of engaging with it evokes forces within us that would otherwise remain dormant. Courage we didn't know we had. Creativity we hadn't tapped into. Depth we hadn't cultivated. Compassion we hadn't developed. The obstacle is the call. Our response to it is the awakening. And once awakened, these qualities remain with us, available for the rest of our journey. Life rarely gives us obstacles that we are incapable of facing, although it often gives us obstacles that we believe we are incapable of facing. The difference is crucial. Our sense of capability is usually much more limited than our actual capacity. It's like the adult elephant that remains restricted by a small stake because, as a youngster, it learned that it couldn't break free. Often, what keeps us stuck in the face of obstacles is not our actual incapacity, but our learned sense of incapacity, the limiting stories we have internalized about what we are capable of enduring, overcoming, and becoming. One of the most profound transformations that occurs when we begin to see obstacles as portals is a change in our relationship with time. When we see obstacles only as blockages, we resist them, try to rush them, feel that we are wasting time while we deal with them. But when we recognize them as essential parts of the journey, as points of potential transformation, our relationship with time changes. We begin to see that the time stuck in the obstacle isn't wasted time, it's gestation time, preparation time, transformation time. Just as a chrysalis isn't wasting time as it dissolves before reforming as a butterfly, there is an ancient contemplative practice called non-preference that can be profoundly liberating when we face obstacles. It doesn't mean that we don't have natural preferences. Clearly, we would prefer smooth paths to rocky ones, success to disappointment, ease to difficulty. It means that we practice not getting stuck in these preferences, especially when reality is already different from them. Like an experienced sailor who doesn't waste energy wishing for the wind to blow from a different direction, but skillfully adjusts his sails to the present reality. This detachment from our preferences doesn't make us passive, but paradoxically more effective in responding to what is. There is an interesting phenomenon we can observe when we look back at the great obstacles we have faced in the past. Often it is precisely these moments that have most clearly defined who we have become. If you ask people about decisive moments in their lives, they will rarely mention periods of ease and comfort. They will almost always talk about challenges, losses, failures, moments of crisis that forced them to discover who they really were and what they were capable of. It's not that we should seek out suffering, but we can find deep meaning in recognizing that our difficulties are not detours in the story of our lives. They are often the most significant chapters. In the end, perhaps the most liberating realization is that there is no real distinction between the path and the obstacles on the path. The obstacles are not in the way, they are the way. The stones beneath our feet, the rivers we need to cross, the mountains we need to climb, these are not impediments to the journey, but the very texture of the journey. And when we embrace this truth, something extraordinary happens. We stop living in a state of constant resistance to what is, always waiting for the moment when life finally becomes easy, and we start to fully engage with life exactly as it unfolds, with all its challenges, its surprises, its unexpected detours. And we discover, perhaps with astonishment, that this acceptance does not make us passive, but powerfully creative in our response. Let me share a secret that life's great storm navigators know. Obstacles never have the last word unless we give up. Every no we encounter contains within it the seed of a different yes, often a yes more aligned with who we really are and what we came here to do. Each closed door invites us to find or create a different one, often one that leads to more authentic spaces for us. Each ending carries within it the potential for a new beginning, often one we couldn't have imagined before. This is not simplistic optimism or a denial of life's real difficulties. It is a recognition of the paradoxical truth that the wise have always known, that it is often precisely through our deepest wounds that our most unique light finds its way into the world.